Okay, good evening, everybody. We are going to do our webinar on IEPs, which are Individual Educational Plans. I'm Susan Norwell, co-founder of Rett University.
I'm Courtney Barnum, who I am a training educational specialist for Rett University. Lizzie?
I'm Lizzie Heinmiller. I'm a speech language pathologist for Rett U.
And we have to introduce our newest person, Olivia, who has joined us. And to join us, we have 4 people now. We're so excited.
Hi, everyone.
People in Rett U. It's like a boon, except now we have to remember to put her on the PowerPoint.
We do. We got to put you on the thing.
All right. So these are some things that we need to know about IEPs. First of all, they are a legal document. They are provided under federal law within public schools. And we put public in big letters because private schools do not have to adhere to the same laws that public schools do, so that they're not held to the same, and homeschooling also, they're not held to the same standards. They're developed by a team, including the parents. So the parents are, I always say to my parents, you're an equal member of the IEP team. You're not a second-class citizen. If they say something you don't understand or you don't like, you have a say. If they steamroll over you, that's really not the law. The law is that you are a part of the team. Now, that being said, they need to provide the IEP to you in advance of the meeting, because what good is it if you're sitting at a table reading it for the first time, a document that they've prepared and they've worked on for maybe a week, and now you have to make some snap decisions and you don't have a chance to have your professionals take a look at it. So that idea of a team means you have to come to the table equally prepared. It is based on disability categories. Well, the IEP isn't based on the categories, but in the IEP, they will have what the disability category is that your child has been determined to be at, not the IEP that's determined at the MDC, the time when they do the assessment. And every 3 years, kids are assessed, and you can change categories at that point in time, as it's usually tied to an assessment. It outlines goals and support services needed. The other thing that I forgot to add in here is accommodation. So we should talk about goals, but also we should talk about accommodations, and also the support services that are required or needed. Oh, I'm trying to turn this, and
I have a feeling, everybody, that this is going to be like a 2-parter, because we have a lot of great questions and there's a lot of information, and we're going to try to get to as much as possible as tonight, but we may have to do a part 2 because there was a lot of great questions that you guys posted, so we wanted to make sure we're hitting everything.
Yeah, and some of them are answered within the text that we're presenting tonight, and then we were planning on having a whole just question period where there's the Q word, but just the wrong one popped up. The question would just be like people throwing them out, and then we can just respond to them. So that would be great. And let me get rid of that thing. All right. So IEP teams usually include the teacher. That's a good thing if you have a teacher. A regular education teacher has to be a part of the meeting, because we always assume that there's going to be some inclusion, and they should be there. All the therapists, a district representative, which usually is called an LEA, and the parents. And all concerns and changes must be put in writing. And I think this is really important. If you're at a meeting and you are in disagreement with something they are recommending, or you want something added into their document that explains something about your child or something that you've noticed, you can say in the meeting, I need this put in the notes. I need this to be written. And when you receive the document back, if your things are not in there, if the things that you have concerns about, the things that you have said, the changes you want to make aren't in there, then you call another meeting and say, this document isn't complete. So I think it's really important. Like, I was in an IEP meeting where the teacher reported that the nurses were only there 67% of the time. Mom brought the calendar that shows what days the nurses checked in at her house and escorted the child to school. And it turned out to only be like, out of all the days of school, that there were 8 times the nurse was missing. That's a significant change we wanted in the IEP, because it makes it look like we're just sending the kid to school with no nurse. And that's a problem. That was an excuse they were using for why they would put her in a certain placement, and that couldn't hold up because the data they had wasn't correct.
And you can also ask for a prior written notice. I'm working with this with one of my clients right now, where they put in a prior written notice regarding a nursing situation at their school, and the school has not yet responded. They've had all summer to respond. So prior written notices are also a very good way to get those, because then the school has to either approve what you're asking, or they have to deny and explain why they're denying it.
Right. So again, it's not like you want to go into the IEP meeting feeling combative.
No.
Not my tack. I just want it to be documented. And I think that's good for both sides, to tell you the truth. I think it's good on the school side, and I think it's good on the parent side, because that's where a lot of things get confusing and mucked up, is because people are saying two things and they both think it's the same thing, and then they look at it in writing and realize, no, that is not what I said. So I just think that that's a really good thing to know. You have the right to say it. You also have the right to write something and have it attached to the IEP.
Yes.
So maybe you're not the person in an IEP meeting that feels comfortable being very verbal, but you can always write something and have it attached to the document too. IEP meetings have to be established once a year, right? And it's on some districts do all their IEP meetings in the spring, which is then horrible for the teachers. Some do them on the child's birth date, so there's kind of like rotating, IEPs throughout the year, and they don't all happen at once and everybody gets all grumpy at the same time. But you can call an IEP anytime as a parent. You have a right. If you're finding that you're not getting documentation of the progress that your child is making, if you're not really thinking that one of the goals is applicable anymore, or there's been a new situation, like I've had parents have a kid with no diagnosis and all of a sudden they're diagnosed with Rett, right? It happens at some point in time. The kiddo has been delayed for a while, so they're in special ed, but they get the diagnosis and they say, we need an IEP meeting because we have a diagnosis now. With the diagnosis comes some recommendations about how we should work with this child. So the present level is an important part of the IEP. If you do not see a present level, you have to ask them, how are they determining what the goals are?
And if the IEP or the present level is only like 2 lines long, I'm not saying it should be like 500 pages, but especially with our students who are more complex, there should be some pretty good information in there that explains what the child can do. I think one of my biggest things when I was a teacher, I remember going to my first IEP meeting with Christy, and they sat there and they talked about every single thing that my sister could not do. And it was the most frustrating and depressing meeting of my life. And so when I was a teacher, I always made sure to talk about everything that the child could do and where we needed areas of, support. But making sure that it is talking about what your child can do and how they're doing it. Because especially, as I always say in my meetings, when I'm going into meetings, if your team gets abducted by aliens overnight, there's going to be a new whole group of people who are not going to know how to work with your child. So those supports and things like that need to be in place.
Actually, present levels should be what the child can do. Because, you could say, well, she doesn't speak Spanish. Well, of course, she's in an English-speaking house. I mean, you could list a whole bunch of things that a kid can't do. But I think what the present levels also do is they talk about how well does this team know your kiddo. I remember sitting in an IEP meeting where all they said was that she had a great smile. Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, that's really good, but come on. I don't think we're like signing her up to be, in a fashion show. So I think we're trying to educate her. So what can she do in the classroom? What can you stand on and say, she knows these letters, or she knows these sounds, or she's able to exchange 2 comments about a topic. But if people are not able to write a present level that sounds like your kid, then you've got probably more problems than just the IEP itself.
Does it pass the stranger test?
Right. Yeah, it really doesn't. Goal writing. I always say you shouldn't have an IEP you have to drag in with a wagon. Because if you're burdening that staff with that many goals, they're not going to spend much time educating the child. Documenting and keeping data on goals takes time. I mean, it takes time as an educator. But if you have so many of them, it almost is taking the place of the curriculum at some point. And I just want to make a differentiation between curriculum and goals. So the goals are not the curriculum. And it's unfortunate that you will still find in this day and age that curriculum is kind of like the file cabinet. When I taught, we had file cabinet curriculum. There wasn't curriculum. There were just things you gathered over the years in your file cabinet, and that's what you used to teach from because we didn't have as many materials as we have now. We certainly didn't have technology when I started. So I didn't even have a cell phone. I think it didn't know. It happened much later. So you don't need a goal about everything. What you need to have is a clearly defined curriculum, and then the goals are a sampling of what you would like the child to achieve within that curriculum. The exceptions would be social emotional, because there's usually not a curriculum for that. And anybody who says, I want them to recognize emotions in pictures is really not doing the child any service because that does nobody any good. But you for reading, for math, there should be some kind of curriculum that is driving this classroom. And the communication goals would be slightly different because usually people don't use a curriculum there. They're taking a look at functions of communication across the day that they can use. Independent, what are they able to do on their own? What's the next independent thing we would like to build? Usually those are in conjunction with an OT and a PT. And then social emotional. Sometimes, if you're lucky, like I have some schools that have some really good social workers who are doing some great social groups with kids and bringing peers in, which is a wonderful thing. And they're so sensitive, I think, because of their training to picking up on nonverbal cues. And I've seen some really good goals come out of that. But at the same time, if you've got like 20 goals, nobody's going to keep track of 20 goals and do it well. And they're going to spend more time measuring the goals than they are teaching to the curriculum. And that's where we have to have this kind of balance. Where I tend to find those kind of IEPs is where people don't really trust the staff. Mm-hmm. So if they're doing anything. So they want them to measure every little thing because they're not trusting that it's happening. If that's the case, then you need to kind of dig down and get with the staff and figure out how to remedy that situation versus burdening them more with additional goals that are going to make their job harder. There's another solution to that, and it isn't writing a restrictive tome of an IEP that has everybody running around trying to figure out how they're going to do it.
And really quick, there shouldn't be an IEP time in the daily schedule.
Yeah.
If they have an IEP time that they are taking, this is our time that we do IEP data, that's not okay, especially for our kiddos with Rett, because I think that makes it 10 times more difficult for them if they're having an off day. You can't really take data at that time for them. And really, data should be kind of fluid throughout your whole day so that you can catch it in the natural environment and not just we're sitting at the table and you're handing me a comb 5 times. Like, that's not data collection. That's not a natural environment.
Yeah. So, Olivia, do you want to speak to what we were talking about the other day? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Like you were talking about what your idea for how you're going to measure goals kind of across the experiences. Maybe if you talk to that, that would be good.
So, depending on the different skills you want to assess underneath a goal, so you can have a goal of, let's use a communication goal as an example, where a student will exchange, have two exchanges with a peer. That can be measured in person, that can be measured over a text message, that can be measured over email, and it's up to the IEP team or whoever's collecting data to be very specific about through email with this type of supports, the student was able to send out, 2 out of 5, respond to 2 out of 5, communication requests and respond 2 out of 5 times. So, skills, IEP objectives, and goals should not just be worked on with one specific set of materials, with one specific person for the entire duration of an IEP, because that goal will not be mastered. That goal will be mastered with that material and with that instructor or data collector. So it's really important that our kiddos are able to master goals across environments and across collaborators. So if that is with OT and with an intervention specialist, and also with speech or para or in gym class, goals should not just be picking up a pencil off of a table when you ask, and oh, their receptive language is really high and they can follow directions because I asked only for a pencil for 3 months and they mastered the goal now because they picked up a pencil. But if they're not going into the lunchroom and picking up a napkin, or they're not going into the office and retrieving an envelope, then you can't really prove, the data will not show that that goal is actually mastered.
Yeah, and I remember when I was in early childhood, and maybe because of HIPAA, this may not be allowed, but I had these high ceilings that had like a soffit. That's the word I'm looking for. I used to put the goals for each kid up there so that when we were working in every area of the room, everybody was conscious of what goals we were working towards, what objectives we were trying to meet. Or if we had a fine motor station where we did things there, they were there so that people could just kind of look at them and then check things off in the moment. Because especially in Rett, I've heard teachers say, Friday is my assessment day. Really? You only do it on Fridays? Yeah, that's the district wants us assessing everybody on Fridays. Well, I wonder if my kid just had a seizure. You're not going to get any data on that Friday, I assure you. And so to me, those kind of restrictive things, I think, are people's efforts to make sure data does get collected. But the problem is for our kids, and that can be written in as an accommodation in their IEP. That you need to be monitoring these goals and assessing these goals when the child's regulated and able to be available for learning. You can't just pick your time of day. You should be picking a good time of day for them. I mean, I do this with my private clients all the time. I've got on my schedule that they're going to take a benchmark test when I see them that day because I want to see if I can move them up to the next level reading. But they come in, they've just had a seizure, and they look like, they're about ready to fall asleep. And I'm like, well, this is not going to be a time where I'm assessing them. That is just unfair. And I'll do something different. I will do something that's a little bit more, lively or has a little bit more of a review component to it because that's not the day to assess. And one would think that would be common sense. But as we've all heard, common sense is not that common these days. So IEP goals should be SMART goals, and each one of those letters stands for a way to think about goals. The S is for specific. So in other words, if I pick up that IEP and I look at that goal, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do to measure it, and I know exactly what I'm measuring, right? But let's go back to what we talked about, present levels. If I have a goal that says, I hate these goals, the child will reduce a certain behavior by 10%. And I say, well, what's the present level? Well, we don't know. It's just a lot of behavior. Well, how do you know you've reduced it by 10%? I hate reduction goals. I think it's ridiculous. I think you talk about what you want the kid to do, not what you want the kid not to do. That's just not specific. But again, if you don't know what the child can do, how do you know what the next goal should be? Or if that increment in the change is too little, too much for a year? They should be measurable. Measurable means they're stated in such a way that I can see, not just surmise, not just figure out, but I can see that the goal is met, that the child is doing what I'm asking them to do. Achievable. I've had people say, I just saw an IEP this week for a kiddo with Rett, where they're going to have her write her name with a pencil. And I went, okay, so let's back up here and talk about Rett, and the thing that they probably use the least is their hands. So, and the OT in the room who was being trained, I was doing a training, the OT in the room went, oh, thank goodness, like this. She goes, I couldn't figure out how I was going to teach her how to write her name with a pencil. I said, well, that's because you can't. So that's not achievable. We have to think about what we're doing here. I've seen goals where, because they're in transition, they're going to have to wipe down a table. Sorry, you're going to have that kid doing it hand over hand from now until next Sukkot. And by the way, that's you doing the goal, not them.
Yeah.
Relevant. That I think is the one that we largely forget. Is this goal going to, or this objective, going to do anything meaningful for them and their life? So computation is a great example. Long division, a long division with a divisor of 3 digits. Really? Really? I don't know about you, but I don't do long division with three numbers being the divider, right? Not the dividend. The dividend is the one in the box. I would use a calculator.
Right.
So
or safety signs. I've had like girls with safety signs, and I'm like, I don't mean to be rude, but our kids cannot move themselves. A lot of our kids cannot move themselves. When are they ever going to need to identify safety signs? Like, they're always going to have somebody with them, and they're like, but it's very important. I'm like, that is not relevant to her life.
The carer. Let's put it in the carer's IEP, right?
Yeah. Can I add that IEP goals, in thinking about what is relevant and specific, and I love SMART goals, they should not be based on what the teacher has taught in the past and the strategies that the teacher is used to using.
Exactly.
Because, sure, I have had kiddos that are mobile, independently mobile, that need to know what a stop sign looks like or an exit sign so they can exit a building if they need to. But that does not apply to everyone, and that's not a goal that I will write on anybody's IEP. It has to be relevant to the person. So if you think that you're getting a goal for one of your children that is not relevant, I would ask, is this relevant to you or to my child? Because a lot of times teachers will go with what they know and what they've seen success for, but not every skill is successful or relevant to every student.
Right.
Very good
And
point.
I think that sometimes that is a good point, because I think that what we're seeing is a reflection of the teacher's skill or experience versus her really thinking about the individual child. And then they have to be time bound, some kind of time. They're going to do something so many times out of so many times, or they're going to do something this percentage of time, or they're going to do
over a
it by
period
this
of time.
Right. Like, so writing goals for
say.
my kids with Rett, I don't say they're going to do this in one sitting, because guess what? It takes a long time to write letter by letter. And sometimes it might take 3 times you meet with them. It might take 3 weeks to get a full paragraph. But is the goal that they're in a hurry, or is the goal that they can write a paragraph? And when you're thinking about that, we truncate their learning if we make the time bound too fast for kids who move a little bit slower. Other kids can do that kind of writing in a short part of time, just not our kids with Rett. That isn't going to happen. Covering I have to move you people out of the way because I can't read the next thing. Hold on. Let me just I can't see what's next. Oh, there you are at the bottom. Isn't that cool? Covering the areas of need for your child. So this is where I think it's really important for parents to come prepared with this to a meeting. They need to be able to say, my kid really needs, if at all possible, to eat with a fork. For some kids, that is just not going to fly, right? But for some kids, they're kind of close to it. And can we do that? Because what ends up happening, I have a student with Rett who can eat with a fork, who can stab and eat with a fork. We worked on that. She had a baseline, a present level that we knew we could maybe get there. And I'll tell you, she's in a group home. What happens in a group home, if you cannot feed yourself by some means, is you have to wait in line for the carers to feed. There's usually one carer at dinner for 4 people, and now you have to wait to get fed. That might be a really important goal for somebody. This girl happens to love to eat. She could eat all day long. She has no off switch, right? So she was motivated to do it. She didn't find it awful. We found something that worked for her. It's kind of messy, but she can at least get some food to her mouth. And some of my girls, that would not be possible for at all, but for her it is. And that's that individual that Olivia was just talking about. It may not work for all kids, but for the ones it works for, it's worth the time and the effort. that need to be realistic and relevant. I think we were just talking about it's like people have written goals where, oh, I know somebody wrote in one of my little girls' meetings that she would have to respond to a peer within 20 seconds because her peers, her gen ed peers, just don't like to wait around. And I said very sweetly, I think that would be a great goal if you can cure her Rett syndrome. But if you cannot cure her Rett syndrome, then that goal is not realistic. There is no way, especially if you're hurrying her along, her Prexia is going to go through the roof and it's just not going to work. So goals aren't based on the school district curricula. They're not supposed to be based. I've seen this and it drives me nuts when it happens. They give the kid a Brigance. And on the Brigance, it says they will use an object to pretend it's another object. And because they don't do it, oh, funny, they can't use their hands. That could be why. Then they make that a goal. They take the items from the test that they didn't pass. And by the way, there's no test that has been normed for kids with Rett syndrome, so they shouldn't even be using them. Not any standardized tests, not any standardized developmental levels, because you look at the cognitive section of the DAISY. Of the 10 items, 8 of them are motor based. So you're not testing their intelligence, you're testing their motor. Of course, they're going to come up at the 1% level for cognition, which is invalid testing. And now you're using that invalid testing to write goals off of it, which is just awful. And also not legal. You're not supposed to use the test items as your goals, because then even if you have the audacity to use the same stupid test again, you've now taught to the test. And that's not good at all. And so there's all these external standards now. Every district has their set of standards that they use for their gen ed kids. Those standards, and I've seen this happen many times, are not to be used as goals. They're standards. Underneath those standards are goals that you can write that help us get to those standards, but the standards are never to legally be used as goals. That is that page. And we've got 2 minutes to go, which means this is a way meatier topic than we kind of thought. And at this point, if anybody has any questions, we should probably put everybody's cameras up and they can ask questions, and then we can pick this up the next time we do a webinar.
Yeah, because there's so much more information that we can go into. So in the last few minutes, if everybody wants to turn on their cameras, jump in if you have a couple of quick questions that we can answer about IEPs. And then like we said, we have our IEP course online that you guys can take. And then we also we're going to do a second, our next
webinar
will be the IEPs part 2.
Right. And we kind of knew this. We kind of knew this after we saw all your questions come in, because they came in and they were really great. So that's going to be the 10th of September.
Yes.
There were some great questions. So anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Just want to say howdy. Any of the above? No, Heidi Greenall.
I know.
Hold on, I'm coming. No, sorry, I was putting food in Ellie's mouth and I was distracted.
I know how Ellie likes to eat. So there you go.
Ellie, we're dinner time here. I think I do have a question, and I think I'm kind of unprepared with it though, because I haven't. Courtney, did you read Ellie's IEP that I sent you?
I love you, but no, you sent it to me yesterday.
I know. And I haven't gone through it either. But I know, like, the one thing that I was listening, or that caught my attention, was when you guys were talking about the, where she's at now. Like present levels, yeah. So one thing with Ellie, and I get a comment every time, she's only been at school 4 days. And they're like, oh my God, she's a different kid. So I think, one, she's using her talker, or they're using it, right? They're using the device. And with, she's been on debut 4 years, and it's really helping her a lot also with that. So I feel like I I want to make sure that her IEP meeting will be coming up, and they do have to do a new assessment, like you were talking about. And they are the one thing we have going for us right now is they are so excited because they feel like it's a new kid, right? Because
can they delineate to you what they see as a difference? Because then you've got some levels, you've got some present levels to stand on, and don't let them use any standardized tests because none of them are valid. And I always am very polite to the psychologist to say, you do understand that you could lose your license if you use an invalid measure on a child.
Oh, you mean when they do the assessment?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so at the assessment, they said there's a bunch of stuff that I have to answer questions for that they're going to send me.
Okay, they're going to send you the BAS, most likely, which is a measurement of what her independent skills are. And again, if you look at the cognitive section, they're going to be motor based. Please don't fill up, say this doesn't apply to her cognition because she can't do any of these with her hand.
Okay.
And if you feel like everything it's going to do is no, no, no because she can't do it, then say this isn't an appropriate measure. It's not normed on kids with Rett syndrome, and it's going to point out all the things she can't do and not the things she can do.
Okay, so then how do you go back?
So how do you go back? Have you ever filled?
Well, I mean, if I can't fill out all those things, like then what do I do? I just go back to them and say, "If this, we can't.
This isn't valid. It's not normed on somebody who can't use their hands purposely because the cognition part has got all these motor-based items on it. And you say you need to use a dynamic assessment. Dynamic assessment is we're going to take a look at what she can do. We're going to document what she can do, and we're going to write descriptions of what she can do. So we have an assessment now that says not only what she can do, but how we get her to do it. So a little girl that both Courtney and Olivia and I have worked with, I went into her school and did a dynamic assessment. They said she couldn't do anything. Well, that's not really helpful when you're writing an IEP. And so I just did probes. What does she do when I read her a book? What does she do when I'm communicating with her and modeling? Does she instantaneously imitate what I'm doing, or does it take a few times so that I could talk about how long it took her and how many exposures she needed? What positions were best for her so that she stayed alert? What letters did she know? What kind of skills did she show when I was reading a book to her? Did she use her eye pointing to look at pictures? Did she answer questions, simple questions about the text? I mean, I did all of these things that were based on literacy skills, communication skills, and social skills. Videotaped the whole thing and then described each videotape. So then when it went into her documents, they could not only see what she could do, they could see how she was doing it because it would link to videos that we were taking at the time. Now that's a piece of information you could take it anywhere. She moved schools, they moved cities, they moved anywhere. You would have a lot of information about how the kid operated, which is really important in Rett, not just what they know, but how they do it and how can you elicit it from them. That helps move the ball forward.
I did a dynamic for one of my clients 2 years ago, and every time they have a new person on this child's staff, on her team, those people all watch those videos from the dynamic assessment I do because they now know how to work with her. The rigor of what she's doing and what she's doing has changed, but the way we work with her and those supports that we put in place, really, those are fairly.
Well, you're consistent because if you keep the motor plan the same, then they have to use less cognitive energy to figure out what's going on. You can only do so much with your working memory. You've got to build some automaticity, and it's only through keeping the motor plan the same. So now you've got the motor plan of the yeses on one side, the no's on the other. So then you use it for answering questions with partner-assisted scan. Then guess what? You're doing it with writing. So now you're using the same motor plan, but the skill development is moving up. But they don't have to think, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell her that I want this one? Because it's so well established by the time you get to the harder stuff, the motor plan is so established, all they have to worry about now is what letter do I need to spell this word or this idea. So that's the kind of information that travels with a kiddo and makes for success. Because to tell you the truth, if somebody handed you a document that said this kid's cognition is at 1%, does that tell you what to do next?
Nope.
No. Just like if they give you a document that said the kid's IQ is 40, do you know what to do next? No. So that testing, which is invalid, by the way, doesn't really inform the instruction. So you need them to be thinking about a narrative to write about your daughter so that we have information that's going to help the team know what to do and how to do it. Are you working with the greenhouse now, Courtney?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. She'll be your best advocate, Heidi.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Not that you aren't, Susan, just so you know, we love you.
I know.
You're amazing. Yeah. Courtney just came to Courtney came to our house and then I stole her. So that's what happened.
There you
So
go.
I was gonna lock her in the basement.
I don't
but that didn't
travel
work.
anymore. I don't travel anymore. So
Heidi,
yeah.
that's
yeah.
not funny because I'm in the middle of watching you, and I don't know if you've watched that show, but he had a locker in the basement, so.
I know, but I did try to get you down there, but it didn't work. So that's okay.
All right.
So we're going to come back in a month on that date that I gave you, which I can't even remember at this point. And if there's any more questions, we'll just add them in.
Yeah.
And we'll just hit this out of the park because I think that this is an important thing for everybody.
Definitely. So you'll have to register again. This is kind of just a way to keep this very Rett friendly and very within the family, so we don't have any issues. And so keep an eye on our social media for any more info, for when we put the registration up. We will probably put it up, Lizzie, 2 weeks ahead of time like we did last time. Yep. We will put this section of the webinar up on YouTube as soon as possible, and with this recording, and then we'll do section 2 on, I think it's September 10th. So keep an eye on our social media for the updated dates. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to email us.
All right.
All right, guys.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.